All right, now let's go through an example of decomposition at the programmatic level. And what I mean by that is, given a large problem, say creating the code for the game of Hog, how do we break it down into its individual files? So first, we put all of the game logic, right? The calculations for figuring out player scores and printing out the player scores after a return, all of the implementation of the rules of Hog, all of that was encapsulated into its own file, hog.py. Additionally, we also had the visuals for the game in hoggui.py, and it made sense that these two were separate because they were serving separate purposes. One of the files served the purpose of implementing all of the logic, the score functions, everything that powered the actual game itself, its winners, and the scores at every turn, whereas the GUI was just a visual representation. It allows us to see what is happening in the game at every turn and to interact with the game. But that's really a separate job than implementing the game itself. We also have ucb.py, which included some utility functions, including the trace function, which we could use for debugging. An important thing to note about this is that the utility functions are not unique to Hog, and they'll come up in future projects. So it's useful that it's in its own file, such that it's easy to reuse in future programs. And we also had dice.py, a function that simulates dice rolls. And as a reminder, dice.py includes make fair dice and make test dice, which return representations of die. And so this is maybe kind of weird, right? Dice.py, this is game logic. We use the dice in the calculations of Hog. But if I were making the game of Hog, and I might be making future games, why does it make sense for dice.py to be its own file rather than put into hog.py? I'll leave this as a question for you all to answer, and then we'll answer it together afterwards. All right, so it makes sense for dice.py to be encapsulated into its own function, or file rather, because the representation of these dice is not at all specific to the Hog project or the game of Hog. And in fact, if we're going to make games in the future, it makes sense for the dice to be encapsulated into their own file so that they're easy to reuse in future games. So this is just an example of decomposition being helpful for function reuse in future programs.